Andy, hi, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dan. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. A spoiler alert for those of you who are tuning in, it's Valentine's Day today, which in your world, in the world of social media, often has been a big thing. It's often like the last at least 5 years that I can remember, there's been sort of regurgitated branding all over Instagram and TikTok and whatever else. It feels a little bit like it's not as bad this year, but what are you seeing on the ground?
Not a great deal. And to be honest, I don't really pay attention to any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, same.
It probably sounds kind of weird for someone who spends their life in social media. I don't really pay attention to any passing trends, to be honest. I find it too distracting from like the day-to-day fundamentals of what it takes to build a brand.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's weird that I think there's certainly feels like there's some brands that have moved away from that. Like every time there's a big there's an event in the year, we're going to post something, and it's going to be the same as we did last year. It feels like it's moving away from that slightly. Now brands are sort of sticking more to what like work for them in terms of building a community.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. I'm hoping so.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So for the audience that don't know who you are, tell us who's Andy.
The very high level is probably 15 years in social media and marketing in general, always been in B2B, particularly in software businesses. So that's my kind of narrow slice of the world that I've seen. 2016, founded or co-founded rather a social media marketing technology company called ContentCal. In 2016 through to 21, grew it to becoming the fastest growing in the space. And then it grew so quickly that it caught the attention of Adobe. Adobe wanted to buy it, and yeah, we duly obliged. And now, over the last 3 years, been building the social media marketing technology into Adobe Express, and yeah, basically making a lot of our functionality entirely free, making it super simple for like small businesses to create content and distribute it across all manner of channels. So yeah, that's the journey.
I mean, that sounds like an incredible. That's like the perfect exit for a founder who starts like a really cool brand is to go and work for a company like Adobe that are really cool, and you get to get involved in what they're doing as well.
Yeah, it's certainly very eye-opening, and you realize when you've just been in startup land, you realize that there's a great deal that you do not know. So yeah, very different challenges, and working with some of the smartest people on the planet, of which when they explain stuff to me, I'm clinging on for dear life, trying to follow what they're saying. So yeah, that's like before we went live, you were like, oh yeah, you're still at Adobe. Then it's just really really interesting, and
Yeah,
that's what you want from day-to-day life. Interest, stuff that
yeah,
keeps you engaged and interested, and you're like, oh wow, I had no idea that this was even a thing. So that's what's kept me here.
yeah. Absolutely. And certainly in my experience, like when I've worked like you for corporate business, big businesses, and smaller startups, and like whenever people ask me which one's the right one, it's never one or the other. It's always like working with a cool team. That's the right one. Like if I get up every day and I'm like, I can't wait to go and work with Andy. He's got some really cool ideas, and he's got this project I'm going to get involved in. Like that's what's fun.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, very well said.
And what was the transition like? I imagine from going from sort of being your own boss and doing your own thing to going and being part of a big company. There's a bit of an adjustment there.
Well, we were a venture-backed business, and I was a co-founder, so I wasn't the CEO, right? So even I had a lot of freedom, not my own boss, and especially as we have a board and you have like increasingly well-established VCs backing you, then you're essentially a slave to them too. Yeah, so to be honest with you, that's not too much of a difference, because you're always accountable to someone else.
Yeah,
But the transition is as you would expect. It's right. You're trading freedom. Sometimes it's frustrating because you can't move fast enough. Um, but yeah, the trade off is, to your point, is like, wow, you really do get to see how a business operates at another level when you're serving. I thought it was impressive that we had 30,000 customers, in 110 countries. But when you're talking like multiple tens of millions,
yeah,
you're like, okay, that's a very different problem to solve. That makes you think so much more broadly
yeah,
about how does someone in Latin America interact with your product, and is that the same experience that someone in Japan would have, or India? And when you just typically build a startup and think, oh, I would say home country is UK, but ultimately US is a huge target. Basically UK and US, and go after it. But then you start to think about what it takes to build in developing markets, and it's completely different, that. So it's given me a whole wide range of perspectives, opened my eyes to new stuff, and I think that's very much the trade-off and the counter to the freedom. You don't have the same creative freedom, of course you don't. So that's the trade. But yeah, again, life is just chapters. This is a interesting chapter of going deep into stuff, and who knows, the next chapter might be something else. But
yeah, definitely. I think a really interesting point about the sort of developing markets versus sort of markets that you really know, like your home market and stuff. I guess the difference is culture more than where they are or who they are. It's probably that their culture difference, and perhaps that you have to think about how you position your offering slightly differently to some markets versus others. Has that been a big challenge for you to sort of wrap your head around?
yeah, I mean, there's a lot to it, and in my role these days is not in marketing. Although I'm that annoying guy that always has a point of view on how our marketers do their jobs, which is sometimes welcome, probably sometimes not. So my role really is from product is to understand like product expectations, there's different ways that people access a product. For example, like Android devices proliferates much more than like a laptop in Latin America, for example. And of course, internet is not as, high speed. Internet is more proliferate across like UK, US, Western worlds, etc. So you got to think about those kind of things too. So that's fascinating. And of course, like all of our global regional marketers across each individual market naturally are tailoring and tweaking the message. But yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go back to ContentCal, if you don't mind. What was the sort of the initial vision when you started the business that you co-founded? What was the idea initially, and what were you trying to achieve?
So I can't be credited with the initial idea. This was someone who had an agency, a social media agency at this point, a guy called Alex, and he had this idea that he'd drawn on a sheet of paper and just sketched out to say, he was going backwards and forwards with his clients, just running a small agency, just as a solo. He had one other with him, actually, like just doing social media marketing for someone else. And yeah, his idea was that we're going backwards and forwards on a Google sheet. Then there's got to be a better way. Like so many businesses have been founded in this way. It's been come out of agencies. Like you could pick so many like great tech companies, and you can basically point back to the fact that they came out from an agency. There's such an interesting correlation here. But anyway, so came up with this basically, like with most software businesses, especially in B2B, you're typically getting rid of some manual double handling orientated process, usually on spreadsheets. So that's what we wanted to get rid of. I met him when he was trying to raise some money for this idea, and I had a background in social, and I quite fancied it. So that was it. I got involved.
Okay, and what was the journey like from sort of there through to taking it to market, taking it from a piece of paper to an actual product you could go out and sell?
I'll try and condense 5 years into a couple of minutes. Basically, you can picture from my hair loss, it had some impact on on stress levels.
Yeah.
And I think there's the initial 3 months of the honeymoon period of like, oh, this is new. Get very excited because you've got a couple of early customers. And then when that scale, you think, oh, right, okay, it isn't just ramping up. The first 3 months was good, but then suddenly you expect every month that it's going to be just a hockey stick growth. And when that doesn't materialize, you're like, oh, okay, what's going on? And we had the kind of standard approach to most like early stage of first time founders. You build the product, you're like, okay, cool, product's done. We build it and they're going to come. So you like run some Google ads and some Facebook ads and go, right, sit back, put the ads live and go, oh, boys, time, let's rock and roll. People are going to sign up, put their credit cards in, and guess what? Got the odd couple, but basically it's like trying to cast them like a massive fishing net and having no idea if there's any fish in this pond at all. So then that instilled like a process of going through like, actually, who are our customers? Who are we going after? Because we're just like so incredibly broad. We had no idea. We just, anyone that does social media marketing, too broad. And I think as we started learning about, what is like minimum viable audience, what's the smallest possible audience that we should serve initially, and grow out from there. I've got, looking back here, because I've got 2 copies of the Startup Owner's Manual, which are very well thumbed. This is like, that was like my Bible. And it gave me a mental model for what's called the customer discovery process, the process by which you can go, all right, let's systemize, how do we find our target audience, and a process to go through that. Because what you don't have as a first-time founder, you don't have a mental model for anything. It's all like, there are so many variables. Imagine it's like a jigsaw where you don't really know what the actual picture you're trying to make is, but someone's just thrown all the jigsaw pieces all over the living room floor. And you're like, I don't really know how to start and what to do. And only when you start to think, okay, this is who we're trying to go after, do you start to build the outlines of the jigsaw, and then you can start to piece it together quite literally. And I think that's a trouble as a first-time founder. You just don't know what you don't know. And going through that customer discovery process allowed us to hone in on who was our target audience. And that, in those early days, were like freelance social media managers. The reason for that is like, they were picking up more clients, so had a big need for collaboration. They needed more lightweight tools. They didn't have massive money, or amounts of budget rather, to pay for more of the more expensive tools, which index more heavily on like review and approval. Because that was one of our major vectors of differentiation, is that review and approval, like collaborative content calendar. And that was like our key opportunity. And in the early days, we were thinking, all right, we've got review and approval, we must be like an enterprise type of play. And then, we would just lose every one of those, or just not be invited to the party. And we're like, wow, what are we doing? What are we doing wrong? So basically, then we found the smallest audience where our feature set worked. And then it became much easier to market to those folk, to scale from those freelance social media managers, build a go-to-market strategy around them. And this is what a lot of marketeers get wrong, and small businesses. It's like, oh, we're targeting these people. And like, no, unless you've got like really strong product market fit across multiple different segments, you should just do one. I haven't seen any business successfully trying to sell to multiple personas in the early stages. Zero in on one, because you tell a better story, your marketing messaging resonates more deeply, and you just grow quicker. So that, and then you scale. It doesn't mean that's the only audience you'll ever serve. You just mature into new audiences.
100%.
So that's.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I think if you look at any sort of big business success story, like from the UK, if you look at like Gymshark, it's a brand I talk about a lot because it's one that everybody can sort of wrap their head around. They started with bodybuilders because that was their market. It was people that are into bodybuilding but want sort of clothes that look good. Let's just target them. And now it's mass market because they've sort of slowly built that on top of that and started, and they understand that they have to build across cultural relevance and do it over time. And it's so true across technology businesses as well. Technology businesses that certainly that I've worked in only ever works when you really understand your market and then build on top of it slowly. It takes time.
Such a good example, that one, Dan, because that's the perfect, and it's such a relevant scenario to what we did at ContentCal. Because the ironic thing is, it's like when you serve a smaller audience, that's how you get word of mouth rocking and rolling, because the bodybuilding community talk to one another, right? And that means that Gymshark grows much quicker. And we had the same with social media, freelance social media managers. It was a growing thing, and they all spoke to one another, all hang out in the same community. So very quickly, we became like the de facto brand for that audience segment. So, that is the quickest way to build a brand, is when you've got the people that you want to target all doing your marketing for you, because you resonate so deeply with them.
Yeah, 100%. I read a post that you did on LinkedIn, I think it was this week, which was all about how you drive word of mouth. And I was reading it and I was thinking, yes, so true. Like you don't necessarily think about it in that context quite often, because it tends to happen organically. But it's so true. Word of mouth is the best marketing money that you can ever spend is trying to get word of mouth, and then it becomes free. So it's
Exactly.
phenomenal if you can get there.
Exactly.
Yeah, 100%. And it's an odd thing because I bang on about brands all the time. So that's the value of it. If you do it really, really well, and your market really understand you, that's what you get.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all a brand is what other people say about you, right? That's it. So you need to be in a place, you need to be in the places and speaking the language of your audience so clearly so that everyone will talk about you like, oh, Gymshark is for me because I'm a bodybuilder. I feel seen, right? It's exactly the same. And unsurprisingly, their business has done phenomenally because they get marketing.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. They're I follow their chief brand officer quite closely, and he's very clever at understanding sort of the cultural things that are going on and working on top of that. So it's definitely true.
Yeah, genius.
Whilst we're on the topic, I guess, of social stuff, looking at it through a lens of B2B, what are B2B brands getting wrong in your opinion at the moment? Through their use of social media, and transversely, what are they getting right?
Oh, where do I start, Dan?
We could be here all day, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I'll try and keep up. Let's just look at the fundamentals. It's misunderstood at the board level and at the senior leadership level, if not at the board. Marketing is seen as a discretional cost for so many businesses where they'll row it back, in down times. We saw this again when at the beginning of 22, when obviously the tide went out on the economy, and you see people turning down marketing because they see it as like, oh, right, times are hard, let's row it back. And again, it's just such a problematic response to marketing. It's because at the top level, marketing is seen as a discretional cost because marketing is conflated with promotion. That's what, unfortunately, many businesses see. Because it's like, oh, marketing is basically, they only see it as like, oh, how I get our product to market. It's like, no. Marketing is everything your brand does that touches the market. Every single thing. So every single phone call, the way you answer the phone, the way the receptionist greets people in the morning, everything that touches the market is marketing. And until businesses truly internalize that and make marketing part of the operating system, it will continue to be misunderstood, underappreciated, and marketers will continue to come under scrutiny because, hey, guess what? A new CMO comes in, and average tenures for CMOs are about 18 months now, probably just under that. Which is just shocking because you can't make those moves in such a short amount of time. And it's only when businesses like, I keep on going back to Gymshark, but you can look at HubSpot, for example, look at Salesforce. They know marketing is a long game. They know marketing is part of their business's organizational structure. It's part of their DNA.
Yeah.
And that marketing is not something that a team over there does. Everyone is responsible for marketing. And when businesses get it, it means it kind of imbues throughout everything that they do. It means like people are incentivized, like salespeople are incentivized to turn their customers into advocates, which then share. It means that every single customer interaction from your customer service team is absolutely delightful. And we ask them for a review, and then they share the review happily on Google or G2 Crowd or wherever. Every single interaction, like the CEO is empowered to be on podcasts and be on stages, or at least the leadership teams in some capacity, to speak the language of the audience. And then, then the marketers are there to like supercharge all of this great stuff that's happening across the organization and basically be the conductors of everything that's happening. And that is what would be an incredible operating model for a business that can truly truly build a brand. Because until marketing's seen properly and we stop taking that ridiculous word on marketing, because it's all bollocks. It's just and I bristle, sorry for my language, but I bristle whenever I hear, so what's the ROI on that? I'm just like, you just don't get it.
Yeah.
I can't have this conversation with you because you just don't get it. Because we're talking about like a brand. If we want to be here in 3 years, we should act like we want to be here in 3 years, not act like we just want to hit our quarterly numbers and the cycle starts again. Yeah. Sorry, this is my soapbox moment. It's like my trigger word. So.
No, I love it. It's and you're bang on. I think the ROI thing is something that comes up so often, and I think there's a couple, in my mind at least, there's a couple of challenges with it, because you're right that you can't measure everything by return on investment. It's not that straightforward. But equally, most businesses are run by, I think, either technical people or financial people, generally speaking, and those people need to understand the numbers. So I think as marketers, we have to do a good job at explaining, this is the type of stuff that's driving return on investment that we can see, but they're not intrinsically linked. So therefore, what I mean by that is you can't spend £10,000 on advertising and then know that you're getting £100,000 left back in return. It's not as straightforward a line as that. The line of attribution is very wiggly and all over the place.
Yes.
You might spend some money on advertising and then you might drive more organic people through your website. Doesn't mean that those people would have come to you if you hadn't run the advertising. So it's a tricky one, but I think marketers have to get comfortable with having those conversations. I think with CFOs, CEO types.
I agree, and there's probably two pieces here, and you'll know this anyway, Dan. But for the purpose of listeners, I think there's two pieces I found that really help. There was some recent research from the LinkedIn B2B Institute, which is usually my go-to. And when anyone's trying to convince leadership, they have some fantastic research that's on our side. And Jennifer, who's the EMEA lead for this B2B.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. So she spoke at an event I ran last year. She's just a phenomenal speaker. But what she spoke on was about capital allocation, allowing marketers to speak the language of finance, to your point, Dan, and referring to this as how do we allocate capital? And that's the way that finance people think about it. We have capital, we have resource. How do we allocate this appropriately? And the problem that us as marketers think, and this is the kind of premise of Jennifer's talk, was typically marketers get it wrong because we think in funnels, right? And we all know that the funnel is a mental model. It's not fact, right? The funnel doesn't really exist. It's just kind of helpful to guide our thinking as marketers. It doesn't make any sense to a technical person or a financial individual because, again, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny because it's a made up construct. So what's better is that actually we speak in the language of fact and finance. So fact number one is the 95-5 rule.
Mm-hmm.
You know this well, but for the purpose of audience, 95% of any given market are not in the market looking for a product. 5% are. So if we have set amount of capital to allocate, if you think about what that 95-5 rule means, let's just take the CRM market. The CRM market, argument's sake, is 60 billion. Let's just say that's the kind of market for CRM every year. Now, 5% of 60 billion is 3 billion, right? So if all of our marketing is going after this, we're going after 3 billion. That is our total addressable market. If we've got resource that we want to allocate, our maximum opportunity is 3 billion. However, there is 57 billion that we can go after in the 95% that are out of market, that have no idea that they have this problem or whatever. When we think about capital allocation, we need to think about this 95-5 rule, in market, out of market, and start to allocate our capital appropriately for this. And that will then start to get the CFO thinking more clearly about, right, that makes a whole heap more sense rather than oh, hey, our marketing budget is 100 grand for this quarter. Let's put 95 of that 100 grand into ads, because they'll know at that point that is a risky allocation of capital because it has a much, much smaller upside. Mm-hmm. So that is a mental model, was more than a mental model. It's kind of rooted in fact and fundamentals as to how we can speak the language of finance and how we can understand what the impact of brand building is as to how we can be, because our number one job is to be first to mind when someone has that problem. So that's how, if we base our capital allocation on what future cash flows might look like, for that 95% that are out of market, so we call that future cash flows, that is what we want to go after. So if marketers need to be able to have that kind of conversation, and that's on us as marketers to really internalize that and think, okay, so how can if I don't feel comfortable having that convo, what's the gap that I need to fill? And that's part of us. There's no point turning around and bemoaning our leadership don't get it, they're idiots. It's on us. It's on us to educate people appropriately and speak the proper language.
I 100% agree. And I think it's one of the things that frustrates me the most is when you see sort of people, especially on LinkedIn, where they're moaning at the CEO doesn't really get marketing, and they sort of make a bit of a joke of it. And it's like, this is your job, that's your job, is to explain it to them. They're not going to get it if their background is they're a trained accountant, or they're a developer that's come up with a cool idea. They understand their market, but they don't understand how to market it. So that's why they employ you. So it's you're bang on. I think the research for the people that are listening that are interested, Ehrenberg Bass Institute did the Notify 5 rule, I think, originally. It's backed up by the piece of research called The Long and the Short of It, which is it's a really detailed piece of research that was done by Peter Field and Les Binet. And then the B2B Institute have sort of built on top of that and sort of taken that through the lens of B2B. And it's really worth reading. It's quite heavy, but there's some really important things in there, like that rule. There's another one I think that's really interesting. It would be great to get your opinion on, which is it says it's something like 90% of buyers choose a supplier from their day one shortlist, and their day one shortlist is only like 3 brands anyway. So it's sort of like, if your brand isn't, if you don't have a brand presence, you're not going to get on that shortlist, and chances are you're not going to get the business anyway.
Yeah, and it's like that. Obviously, you and I very much nerd out on the same collateral. Clearly, yeah. I knew exactly where you're going with that. And honestly, in 3 slides, you could convince a CEO and a CFO of everything we're just talking about with that. What I just said and what you just said. That's it. Like, you don't really need much more intel than that, and it soon becomes like the ROI thing. You realize that is actually nonsense, because you don't justify that ROI. It's the fact is, if we don't do this, we are not on the day one list. It's a binary decision. So, do we want to invest in future cash flows, or are we only going to be fishing in that small pool? It's your choice, CEO.
Yeah, 100%. And then we go from having a fair shot at business to a 1 in 10 chance, and then maybe even smaller than that, depending on the way that our market's structured. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. I think it leads on to a nice point, which is a question that I got asked this week by a pretty senior marketer. Was how do I use the power of brand to stand out in a crowded market? I'd love to get your thoughts on that, just while we're sort of riffing about brand.
That's interesting. I think there's a lot of ways to take that question. And my default state, because I'm an accidental marketer, right? So it's just purely by chance and levels of interest. I've never had any formal training in this kind of stuff. So I want to kind of caveat what I say with this, and caveat purely what I say is just based on the narrow slice of the world and my experience. So this isn't the only way. For me, the way of standing out as a brand, and it'll be the same playbook that I would have referred to earlier on in this podcast anyway, that I talk about my LinkedIn, is that our number one job is to get as many people talking about us as possible. And there is a way of engineering that. So a standout brand is purely that's all I've ever cared about personally, is in our target market, are more people talking about us than our competition. And that's what I've always seen as our brand. And the way I've always, there's 2 things to say to that. So one, the way I've engineered that to a degree has been map the spheres of influence of our audience, truly understand the audience, who we're trying to serve, all that stuff that we spoke about in that kind of customer discovery process from the Startup Owners Manual that taught me that. So when you truly understand your audience and who you're trying to target, once you truly understand that and you map their spheres of influence, because we know, like going back to ContentCal days, the freelance social media managers hung out in certain specific spaces and followed certain specific people. So I then created a Google sheet with all of those spaces. That might be Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, subreddits, all of the usual stuff, right? And a whole bunch of creators I want to build relationships with. And then the process is a long one of me trying to build relationships with every one of those individuals and treat that as a job. Unfortunately, this goes back to your point. This is a bit of a side point though, Dan. Back to your point about what do B2B businesses get wrong? The problem is what I did to build ContentCal's brand, which is a small brand when you compare it to a gym shop, but very well regarded in the space and the audience that we were trying to reach. always on people's day one list, whether we'd win this or not, right? So we're always in the RFPs, which is things that I cared about. But the problem is like everything that I did in the early days to build that kind of like start that flywheel turning isn't on any marketer's job spec. Map the spheres of influence, understand the communities that we want to work with, and spend your time building relationships over the long term. Now, that's not in a marketing job spec. And it's a time-consuming endeavor, but so fundamental. And then the second point of that is once you've got that rocking and rolling, you've built those relationships, you know who you're trying to serve, those spheres of influence that they're influenced by in those individuals, get all that content rocking and rolling and have lots of people talking about you, co-creating content with people. It might be on webinars or podcasts or, collabs, social posts, I don't know, wherever. Basically going as far and as wide as possible. And then what I used to look at every single quarter, and this, I'm like a broken record with this, I just look at, what's Hootsuite's share of voice compared to us? Because Hootsuite was the big one we were going after. That was our big, hairy, audacious goal to go after a 700 million business and beat them from like 3 of us based in a basement in London. Can we do this? And our thesis is like, if we had, or at least the same kind of share of voice as Hootsuite, and our market share was minuscule compared to them at that point, we got as many people talking about us and our share of voice remains high, then we will over time prevail. And that for me is what it takes to build a brand in my lens.
No, I think you've made 2 of the same points that I made, which I think is nice. So we're singing from the same hymn sheet. I think being orientated around your market is obviously really important. Excess share of voice, again, really important. I think the one thing I think we potentially not touched on is personality, and it's something that I think so many B2B brands get wrong. They're sort of afraid, they're on the fence, they don't really want to have an opinion either way, or they assume that by having a personality it means we have to be like a Duolingo, or we have to be really wacky and weird.
Yeah.
That's not what it means at all. You just have to be prepared to have a voice and employ really great writers who can sort of help you craft that, I think, in my view.
Yeah, basically yes to all of the above. And I think it was a really, really interesting lesson for me that I did not appreciate prior to co-founding a business, is the importance of the personal brand and how much unfair bias it gives you at the deal stage and all throughout the sales process. And now I want to say what I'm going to say carefully, because I don't want it to come across as like arrogant and big-headed in any way at all. But like when people saw me post online, because so few people do it like regularly, like post on LinkedIn, etc. When I go to a meeting and I'd introduce myself, most people, or at least there would be one person in the room, be like, "Oh, yeah, I see you online." Immediately, the dynamic of the meeting changes. Immediately, like because sometimes when you see and you like do meetings, you see people who've like checked in, because it's like, I used to do a lot of in-person meetings. You'd be like, "Oh, someone's come here from Sprout Social." So, you're following Sprout. You can already see like, "Oh, someone's looking at our competition." But that they're going to remember ContentCal or me, because they'll remember a face more than they'll remember our brand anyway. So especially at that early stage. So it gives you such an unfair advantage. So both at those kind of like when you're in meetings, both online and in person, that was a really powerful thing to happen. This is why I'm such an advocate of like anyone who's customer facing to try and do as much as they possibly can, to be present online too, because it just changes the dynamic. If you say interesting stuff online, people tend to think you're more special than you are when you see you in person, because immediately you get that kind of like fame thing. Some people are like, "Oh, it's really good to meet you." I'm like,
Yeah.
really?
I'm just
Really? I'm like, my wife thinks I'm a joke. Like, but it's just really interesting when that perception that people have, because it has that kind of illusion of fame when people have been following you and then they see you in person. So that's really interesting. And it also just gives, this was something that I only learned later on, and you'll nod along to this anyway, Dan, is that the more that you get into this, the more you realize that business is fundamentally human and people don't make rational decisions. as much as they like to think they are, they do in like B2B. Like the old adage is absolutely true. People buy with emotion, justify with logic. They are not buying you based on like your feature parity. They're making an emotional decision because they're like, we like you.
Yeah.
And the way to give yourself an unfair advantage is, one, have loads of people that are respected in your customer space talking about you, and two, for you as your own business to really represent, like to your point, Dan, your strong point of view, the thing that you care about, your mission. Like our mission at ContentCal is like, most people don't get social media strategy. It's shit. We're here to fix it, right? So, and it's like when you have a strong point of view that you own, and then you verbalize that online across every different surface that will have you. So I was always on like podcasts and all that kind of stuff to try and distribute that message in an educational way. It gives people an unfair bias towards you because there is a connection. They've heard about you and now they also like you. So that means they'll buy you.
Yeah, no, it's so true. People buy from people, and people buy with emotion. Whether or not people believe that or not, it is fundamentally true. There's probably a whole other episode on sort of human psychology and how that works. But it's so true. People buy because of what they think it says about them as well. There's a reason why I've got an iPhone and not an Android, is because of what I think it says about me as a person. So it's definitely true. And to your point about personal branding as well, it's a bit of an uck word sometimes, isn't it? People sort of, when you say personal branding, sometimes, like, especially in my experience when I've worked with sort of CEOs and stuff, they'd be like, I don't have a personal brand. And like, well, if you don't think you have one, you have a bad one probably. But you're right, it's not difficult. I think I read some research a while ago, and it was something like, if you post more than like once a week on LinkedIn or something, you're in the top 1% of creators, which is crazy to think about.
It's an incredibly low bar. It really, yeah. But I also appreciate that publishing stuff is a big hurdle for many folk. So, whilst people like you and I can do it regularly, it's just been honed over years of just doing it.
I still get imposter syndrome when I post stuff. I still think, oh God, can I say that? Or is someone going to think I'm an idiot or something? But yeah.
I think, you just do it anyway. And I think it's difficult for a CEO with like reputational risk and all that kind of stuff. There are, this isn't a slam dunk strategy. You do need to think about it. But yeah, I think the upside is well documented, and I've certainly seen that firsthand too.
Yeah, 100%. Andy, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I think we could probably spend another 2 hours just sort of riffing on marketing and stuff, but maybe we'll have you back at some point soon and we'll do that. But thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Dan. Great to be on.